Welcome, and let your mind wander gently as we step into a world long past, where the first farmers watched seeds rise from soil and slowly transform ancient forests into fields of gold. Across 10 nights, we will move through the rhythms of planting, harvesting, and quiet reflection, feeling the breeze through empty stalks, the warmth of firelight, and the subtle pulse of the earth, carrying the memory of a time when patience and care shaped the very land itself. They came when the rains had passed and the earth no longer wept beneath the gray skies, when the wind had dried the hollows where water once lingered and the roots have fallen. Trees lifted pale fingers toward the clearing sun. The wanderers moved softly across that emptied land, their steps sinking slightly into the loosened soil where charred trunks leaned like broken pillars, the sense of wood smoke and damp bark rising faintly with every shift of wind, as though the forest still exhaled its memory into the air. They carried woven baskets that creaked faintly under their weight, the strands of reeds darkened by rain and age, their surfaces rough against palms calloused from stone tools and the cutting of hides, every fiber holding the dust of rivers long since crossed. The birds had not yet returned to sing among the blackened branches, and the silence lay thick across the hills, broken only by the whisper of grasses leaning together in the low breeze, like a language too old for them to understand fully, but still soft upon the ears. Sunlight moved slowly over the scarred land, each hour drawing long shadows across the open spaces where once the forest floor had been a tangle of roots and moss, the warmth of afternoon pressing gently against skin that had known too much cold and wandering. The wanderers paused when they reached the edge of the clearing where soil stretched open and bare beneath the sky, and they stood with faces tilted toward the wind, hair lifting slightly as if listening for something older than themselves drifting within its restless breath. One bent and pressed a hand against the ground where ash met soil, the warmth of yesterday's sun still lingering in its grains, and he felt beneath his fingertips the faint coolness of life, waiting unseen within layers of earth turned soft by the passing storms. The baskets were lowered then, resting among the stubble of burnt stems and brittle twigs, and from within came the dull rustle of seeds gathered across miles and seasons, each no larger than a fingernail, yet holding within its curve the hunger of generations. They had carried them across valleys and over ridges where snow once cut the breath from their lungs, carried them through grasslands where winds combed the plains until nothing stood higher than the knees, carried them as though bearing small fragments of tomorrow itself. The air smelled of distant rain, though the sky held only slow-drifting clouds, the dampness of the earth mingling with the faint sweetness of crushed leaves beneath their feet, a perfume of endings and beginnings braided so tightly neither could be separated from the other. The first seed slipped from their hands into a hollow made by the point of a stone, falling soundlessly into the loosened soil where it vanished like a thought sinking too deep to follow, its skin dry and unyielding, yet promising green beneath its quiet shell. They covered it with the flat of a palm, soil against skin rough with the work of winters, pressing lightly as though fearing to wake the earth too abruptly from its long slumber beneath frost, fire, and the weight of countless falling seasons. The wind moved across the clearing again, bringing with it the smell of pine from hills untouched by flame, the faint resinous sharpness folding through the softer scents of ash and earth, until the air felt layered with memory older than any among them could name. Shadows lengthened as they worked slowly, hands moving with the rhythm of those who have no need for haste. The sun dropping toward the edge of the world, where grasses shivered gold and the air cooled, against their forearms streaked with dust and soil. They planted not in rows or measured lines, but in loose scatterings across the open ground, as though fearing too much order might draw the attention of restless spirits. Still lingering among the stumps and hollowed logs where owls once nested and streams once sang. At times, they paused to drink from skins smelling faintly of smoke tide, the water cold against tongues dry from wind and work, And in those moments, the land lay silent around them except for the rasp of grasses, bending together like an audience holding its breath. One among them, older than the rest, lifted his head often toward the horizon where mountains darkened against the falling light, his eyes narrowing as though half expecting the forest itself to rise again from its ruin and take back what the fire had left behind. But the hills stayed empty except for the slow drift of mist climbing from hollows where rainwater still clung, and the only movement came from their own shadows, bending long across the soil as though time itself were stretching towards something none of them could see yet. The seeds ran low before nightfall, the baskets lighter with each handful scattered across the clearing. And still they worked in silence, except for the soft crunch of footsteps and the faint murmur of soil falling from their fingers into the waiting earth. When the final seed was pressed beneath the surface, the wind fell strangely still, as though pausing to consider what had been given, and the air cooled sharply so that their breath rose pale and quick into the gathering dusk. They stood among the darkening stumps, faces marked by wind and sun, their arms streaked with soil-like paint from some ritual neither spoken nor fully understood. It's only felt in the steady beat of hearts remembering hunger and hoping for its end. Night came without stars at first, clouds thickening until the clearing lay in a grayness where outlines blurred and the planted ground seemed to stretch farther than it had under daylight, as though distance itself deepened with every passing moment. The wanderers built no fires. 4 would lay wet beneath the ash, and the wind carried the smell of storms waiting beyond the horizon. So they wrapped themselves in skins stiffened by salt and age, and settled among the low mounds where seeds now slept. Rain began before midnight, soft at first, like the sound of small animals moving through leaves. Then harder as the hours thickened, drumming against their coverings until water ran in silver threads across the soil newly broken by their hands. The earth drank deeply beneath them, swallowing the water into roots not yet sprouted, into seeds swelling beneath the dark, into hollows where tomorrow already began, though none could see it beneath the pounding rhythm of the falling rain. When morning came, pale and cold across the clearing, the wanderers rose, stiff-limbed and silent, their faces streaked with the dampness of rain and dreams. And before them the soil lay smooth again except for the faintest swellings where seeds had shifted below. They gathered their baskets now empty and turned toward the hills where mist moved slow as breath across the slopes, the air sharp with the smell of wet earth and distant pine, their steps carrying them away from the clearing like shadows sliding back into trees. Behind them the wind moved again across the open ground, folding low over the sleeping seeds, carrying with it the sense of rain and ash and soil warming beneath the reluctant sun, as though the earth itself exhaled softly over what had just begun. And far below the surface, where roots would one day tangle and leaves lift their green faces toward the sky, the first stirring of life moved faintly in the dark, slow as memory, certain as seasons, patient as the world, learning its first garden. Days passed before the wanderers returned to the clearing, their paths winding through hills wrapped in thin veils of mist, where rivers whispered softly among stones polished smooth by centuries, the air cool enough to carry the faint taste of distant snow across the tongue. They came by the same route traced weeks before, through the silence of slopes where pine branches clung to beads of rain and the earth smelled dark and rich beneath their steps, carrying with them no baskets this time, only the weariness of long wandering wrapped around their shoulders like weather itself. The clearing waited as they had left it, its wide floor of soil lying bare beneath the open sky where wind had combed the ash into low ridges, the stumps blackened to brittle hollows where insects had begun to stir with the first warmth of the season's turning. They stood at its edge and listened, though there was nothing to hear except the quiet scurry of small creatures moving through the underbrush, the faint rustle of grasses bent by the weight of dew, the creak of their own joints stiffened by nights of cold sleep. The earth showed no sign yet of the seeds buried beneath its surface, no hint of green where they had knelt weeks before, pressing life into soil still smelling faintly of fire and rain. Only the long patience of ground that seemed to dream at its own depth. They moved slowly across the clearing, boots sinking softly where rain had left the soil loose, their footprints spreading like shadows behind them. Heads bowed against the low wind, carrying the thin cries of birds hunting among the stumps, where nests once swayed in branches long vanished. At the center they paused, looking toward the sky as though expecting answers from the slow-moving clouds gathering far to the east where thunder had grumbled. All morning beyond the horizon, promising another night of rain upon the silent, waiting earth. One among them knelt again, pressing calloused fingertips against the ground where seeds lay hidden. Feeling only the cool firmness beneath the surface, the faint vibration of life too small for skin to sense yet certain as breath beneath the ribs of sleeping children. The others stood watching the hills while he lingered there, palms spread across soil, growing warmer with the lengthening day. His face quiet in its stillness as though listening for the slow heartbeat of roots softening within the darkness below. They stayed through the afternoon, not working this time but resting in the hush of air thick with the smell of rain about to break. Leaning against stumps hollowed by fire, their eyes following hawks turning slowly above the clearing in wide circles beneath the silvered clouds. When the rain came, it was sudden, the first drops heavy enough to raise small puffs of dust before soaking the loosened soil into dark clay. The air cooling sharply so that breath hung pale before faces streaked by the quickening downpour. They did not run for cover, but stood with heads tilted back, water sliding down forearms bronzed by sun and wind, gathering in the hollows of palms before spilling into the footprints. Filling slowly around their boots, where grass seeds already clung in trembling clusters. The storm rolled through quickly, leaving behind a sky washed clean, except for a single band of cloud folded like gray cloth above the far hills. And as the sun dropped low, the clearing shone with a damp brightness, smelling of earth and leaf rot and distant pine smoke. Evening gathered slowly around them while they built small fires from branches dragged dry from beneath rock ledges where rain had not reached. The flames trembling against the wind, moving restlessly across the clearing, as though trying to remember. The shape of trees no longer there. They cooked nothing over those flames, but held their hands close, feeling the heat soak into fingers stiff from cold water and long days of travel. Their faces lit in the soft gold where sparks lifted into the deepening blue above the hills. Night found them sitting among the stumps, with the fires shrinking to embers, the sky clearing enough for stars to edge faintly through the drifting smoke, their light trembling across puddles left by the rain where frogs already stirred to life among the reeds. They spoke little, voices low as though the clearing itself were listening beneath the wind, words carrying only across the small distances between them before falling into the hush. Where insects had begun their thin singing among the grass at the clearing's rim, far to the north a wolf called once, its cry carrying like a thread through the cool air before fading among the folds of hills, leaving the silence deeper than before, as though the world held its breath waiting for some answer none of them could give. When morning came, the fires lay cold and black among the stumps, the air sharp with the smell of wet ashes and crushed grass, and as they rose to leave the clearing, they saw the first faint threads of green lifting, where the soil had split beneath the night's rain. Small leaves curled pale against the wind that moved softly across the open ground, trembling as though uncertain of the world above, yet reaching still toward the thin sunlight falling through the last strands of mist clinging among the hills. The wanderers stood watching while the breeze lifted their hair and the smell of damp earth wrapped around them, a smell older than memory itself, carrying the promise of roots and stems and the slow hunger of seeds turning upward toward the sky. They said nothing but looked long across the clearing where hundreds of such green threads, now bent and straightened among the puddles, drying slowly beneath the warmth of early sun, the soil swelling around them like breath drawn deep after long sleep. The one who had pressed his palm to the earth days before knelt again and touched the tender curve of a single leaf no larger than a fingertip, its surface cool and trembling beneath the faint wind, smelling of wet stone and pine needles and the sweetness of spring water. The others moved among the rows of green without speaking, Boots careful not to crush what had risen through the loosened soil during the night. Their shadows falling across leaves, shining damply like fish scales beneath the widening light of morning. Around the clearing the forest waited in its silence, edges dark with undergrowth, where birds now moved again among the branches, their calls threading through the air above the soft hiss of wind, combing the tall grasses bending at the clearing's rim. By afternoon, the sun stood high above the hills, warm against shoulders stiff with travel, and the air filled with the faint clicking of insects gathering among the stumps where mushrooms had begun to lift their small gray caps through the blackened wood. The wanderers rested through that day, while the wind carried the smell of warm soil and sap bleeding from fallen trunks. Their eyes half closed beneath the weight of sunlight pressing through the cool breath of air sliding down from the northern hills. When evening came, they left the clearing again, carrying with them only the sight of the first leaves trembling in the wind, the sound of water running through ravines, newly filled by storms, the smell of soil beginning to change beneath the turning of the season. Behind them, the night gathered slowly among the stumps where shadows deepened over the tender shoots, and the wind bent low across the clearing, carrying the smell of rain and the rustle of leaves. Not yet grown enough to speak above the grasses, beneath the soil, the roots stretched softly outward where no eyes could follow. Winding through darkness, older than the fires and the storms, drinking from the wet earth, while above the clearing, the stars turned slowly through a sky cold and bright with silence. Weeks lengthened beneath the quiet turning of clouds before the wanderers returned. The air warmer now, with afternoons carrying the taste of pollen where flowers had begun to scatter across hillsides once stripped bare by the winds of winter storms. The clearing spread wide before them, no longer the empty earth of ash and stumps, but softened now by countless tender shoots lifting toward the sunlight, their pale stems trembling faintly where the breeze slid low across the newly greening ground. They stood a long time at the edge, baskets empty again because no seed was needed now, their faces weathered by the same wind bending the grass. Eyes drawn slowly across a clearing changed almost beyond recognition since the first planting beneath rain-dark skies. The young leaves shivered against one another with the faintest hiss, a sound too soft to carry beyond the clearing, yet filling the space between trunks blackened and hollow, where insects hummed in shadows, cool with the smell of damp bark and fungi. Sunlight pulled through breaks in the clouds, slipping across the leaves until their surfaces shone as though wet. Though the morning lay dry around them, only the memory of rains lingering where puddles had long since sunk into roots, drinking deep beneath the soil. One wanderer knelt among the tallest of the shoots, running his fingers lightly along their stems no thicker than twine, their surfaces tender against calluses grown from stone and wood, their colors sharp against the dull brown of soil turned warm beneath his knees. The air smelled of water long vanished, of grass seeds splitting their skins, of soil turned soft beneath days of sunlight carrying the heat of noon into earth that once lay cold as river stones waiting beneath winter ice. They moved slowly among the green, steps careful not to crush the fragile leaves, now shoulder high to the smallest child among them. The hush of their movement broken only by the low whistle of wind folding around trunks standing like pillars of a ruined hall. Some paused to drink from the stream running clear at the clearing's edge, its banks softened by moss, bright as new shoots, the water carrying the faint chill of snowmelt from far ridges where winter still clung like breath against the high peaks. The clearing felt larger than before, though the distance had not changed. The sky wider somehow above a land, no longer black with stumps, but dappled now with the soft movement of countless leaves stirring where the wind carried scents of soil and sunlight together. They rested through the afternoon in the shade of half-fallen trunks where ivy had begun to crawl from roots split long ago by fire. The green threads clinging upward across bark, softened by rain, until even the ruins of trees seemed slowly to be returning to life. One of the older wanderers sat apart, shaping a length of wood with the edge of a stone chipped thin as frost, his hands moving with the unhurried rhythm of those who measure time only by the sun's slow descent across the backs of hills. The others watched the green while he worked, eyes half closed against the light sliding low through the leaves, listening to the faint crackle of insects gathering in the grasses, where the first flowers had begun to edge pale yellow among the young growth. Shadows lengthened across the clearing as the sun fell lower, their edges softening until the blackened stumps stretched like the bones of forgotten animals buried half in the soil, the new leaves trembling against the slow breath of wind slipping toward evening. They cooked roots gathered from the wetter slopes, the fires burning low beneath the smell of wood smoke tangled with steam rising from the soil still warm with daylight. The taste of ash faint on every mouthful lifted slowly to tired lips. Night settled around them without hurry, the stars sharp above the clearing where smoke drifted pale across the sky. The darkness carrying the smell of pine bending low along the ridges where owls called softly into the spaces between cooling stones. The wind fell still as though the air itself had stopped to listen, leaving only the faint crackle of fire among the stumps where mushrooms lifted ghost white through blackened bark, their caps wet beneath starlight sliding along the clearing's edges. The wanderers lay close to the fire through the night, skins pulled over shoulders streaked with soil, the warmth soaking into muscles stiffened by miles crossed before this return to a place where new life now moved quietly beneath the moon. When morning spread pale across the hills, they rose slowly, the grass wet against their boots, the air smelling of smoke and cold water and something green beyond the reach of words, the taste of it sharp as spring itself against their tongues. They walked among the shoots again before leaving, hands brushing softly against leaves now higher than their waists, the sun striking their edges until they shone like beaten metal turning in the low wind sliding down from the northern ridges. At the far end of the clearing, a doe moved with her fawn among the grass beyond the stumps, their steps bending the shoots only slightly before they vanished into the undergrowth, where birds stirred among branches thick with the first green of the season. The wanderers watched them vanish without speaking, the silence folding back around the clearing after their passing, as though even the animals knew this place carried something heavier than wind or rain within the roots spreading softly beneath the soil. They followed the stream upward when they left, its water bright against stones smoothed pale by centuries of snowmelt, the path curling through gullies where ferns lifted their narrow heads toward light slanting in long angles through the narrowing walls of rock. By afternoon they reached the ridge above the clearing, the hills rolling outward beneath a sky streaked with thin clouds glowing along their edges, the wind sharper here, carrying the smell of rain gathering far to the west beyond the blue distance. They paused there, looking back across the low valley where the clearing spread like a wound slowly healing beneath sunlight. The young green trembling faintly, as though the earth itself drew breath beneath the open sky, waiting for something still unnamed. One lifted a hand toward the valley, though no one spoke, the gesture neither farewell nor blessing, but something quieter held between both, a recognition perhaps of how the world was changing beneath them slowly as the clouds drifting across the far hills. When they turned away, the sun had begun its long fall toward evening, the air cooling against their shoulders, the path before them narrowing where rocks split into passages marked by wind and the thin cries of birds gliding through the upper air. Behind them, the clearing lay silent again, except for the whisper of leaves moving against one another, the faint murmur of roots drinking deep beneath the soil, the slow pulse of a world learning the shape of its first green breath. Night gathered along the ridges before they reached the lower valleys, the stars rising one by one above the dark shoulders of the hills, the wind carrying the smell of pine smoke from their small fires curling upward where the stream bent beneath a stand of alders. Sleep came slowly with the sound of water moving over stone, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and wood smoke, the silence of the clearing miles behind them still lingering as though carried in their lungs, like breath held too long beneath deep water. And somewhere far behind them the young leaves turned faintly in the night wind, their thin stems bending without breaking as roots held firm beneath the soil where rain gathered softly, waiting for the next sun to climb slow across the eastern sky. The sun climbed slowly when they returned again. Weeks carried on the backs of winds and clouds before their steps found the clearing where young stems now thickened, leaves spreading broad and low as though pulling sunlight deeper into the soil itself. The wanderers came by the path along the stream, their baskets light this time, carrying no seeds. No tools beyond what hung from belts worn smooth by years of movement across valleys, ridges, and the long meadows opening beneath the distant mountains. They stopped where the trees began to thin, at the edge of the clearing where grass bent around their knees, the air rich with the smell of warm soil, new leaves, and the faint sweetness drifting from flowers climbing the blackened stumps left behind by fire. Before them, the green stretched unbroken beneath the sky, stems rising nearly to the shoulders of the tallest among them. The movement of wind passing through like breath across water, bending and lifting each leaf until the whole clearing seemed alive and waiting. The soil lay warm beneath sunlight, sharpened by late spring, shadows falling shorter now than in the months before, the hills folding softly around the clearing where roots spread in darkness, each one gripping the earth as though to keep the wind away. They stood long in the brightness before moving forward, the path they cut narrow through the high stems, leaves brushing along arms browned by sun and wind, their surfaces damp with the breath of morning lifting slowly from soil turned dark by night rain. At the center, they stopped again, laying baskets aside, though little weight had been carried, their eyes tracing the rise of plants thickening enough to hide the earth where seeds once lay uncovered beneath storms. The smell of green now filling the clearing's hollow space. One among them knelt and pressed his palm to the soil, feeling its warmth climbing into his skin, the roots holding moisture beneath, though days had passed without rain. The ground drinking carefully as though keeping something secret beneath its surface. The wind slid low across the clearing, carrying with it the cry of a hawk gliding over the ridges, the call lifting once before folding into silence again, the shadow crossing briefly over the leaves before vanishing into the brightness beyond the hills. They spoke quietly then, voices low against the moving air, their words scattering like seeds themselves across the clearing before falling silent again. The sound of speech too small beside the wide hush surrounding the green and the slow turn of clouds overhead. From the baskets they drew, not seeds, but stones gathered along riverbanks miles behind them, flat pieces warmed by the sun, their edges chipped and smoothed by water, each one carried carefully, as though weight meant less than shape against the hand. They placed them in circles upon the earth, lines forming slowly as shadows lengthened, stones fitting close as though the ground itself remembered where such walls once stood, though no voice among them spoke of what had been before the fire and storms. The walls rose only to the knee at first, rough edges fitting against one another until wind shifted differently within the circle. Its sound bent softly, as though reluctant to leave again once it entered, the air moving slower where the stones stood. They cut young branches from the trees beyond the clearing, carrying armfuls back through the high stems, the smell of sap sharp against their hands, leaves brushing shoulders as though trying to return before the blades could strip them from the wood. The frames of huts lifted slowly above the stones, each branch bent against another until the first ribs of shelter arched like the bones of fish, drying along far-off shores where salt winds carried the cries of birds over breaking waves. Grass gathered in thick bundles soon covered the walls, its blades woven tight by hands practiced through winters spent beneath skins stiffened by frost. The roofs sloping low enough for rain to slide from their edges into earth, drinking heavily after storms. By evening, the first huts stood where seeds had once slept in silence, the air cooling around them as sunlight fell into long bands between the hills, the walls glowing faintly where firelight from small hearths began to breathe against the woven grass. Smoke lifted slowly above the clearing, its threads twisting into the sky, darkening with the cries of birds returning to nests along the stream. Their voices sharp against the hush settling like dust as the first stars began to open above the ridges. The wanderers sat close to the fires, the smell of cooked roots heavy in the air. The taste of ash faint along every mouthful as they ate slowly, watching the wind bend along the edges of the clearing where leaves trembled against the dusk. No one spoke much after the fires settled lower, the night too wide around them for words to carry far. The sound of insects rising thin and steady until it wrapped the clearing in a single knot, in a single note above the crackle of drying wood. The moon climbed late, its light bending through smoke, drifting low across the huts, walls glowing faintly where its silver fell against grass, darkened by shadows of branches shifting with the movement of air high above the clearing's hollow floor. Sleep came beneath that light, the huts holding warmth where bodies lay close together. Breath misting faintly in the hours before dawn, when air cooled enough for the first frost to form along the grass beyond the reach of the fires. Morning found them gathering water from the stream, its surface smooth as skin beneath the rising sun. Birds scattering upward when stones shifted beneath boots, their wings flashing white once before vanishing into the trees still heavy with the smell of rain. The huts stood quiet behind them, smoke rising from only one fire now, where roots cooked slowly, its thin column straight in the windless air. The clearing waiting beneath the sunlight where stems lifted higher than shoulders among the blackened stumps. They worked through the day, carrying more stone, building walls thicker around the huts. The air full of dust, bright against the shafts of sunlight slanting between clouds. The sound of rock against rock, steady beneath the calls of birds along the stream. By late afternoon, the shadows deepened again, the light softening along the grass roofs where wind bent the stems into waves sliding across the clearing. The huts crouched low among the movement like dark islands rising from a wide, restless sea. They sat again by the fires when evening fell, the smell of pine smoke drifting low toward the stream where frogs began calling, their voices echoing faintly along the water curling through stones bright beneath the thin edge of the moon. The huts glowed faintly behind them as night thickened, sparks lifting into the wind, sliding cold along the hills. The walls holding warmth enough now for the youngest among them to sleep without shivering, though the stars burned sharp above the ridges. Before sleep, the oldest wanderer stood a long time beside the stream, his eyes moving across the clearing where grass roofs gleamed beneath moonlight. The hut small beneath the wide bowl of the sky, heavy with stars turning slowly through the dark. He stayed until clouds gathered along the horizon, wind carrying the smell of rain again before morning. The sound of frogs softening as though they too listened for thunder beyond the hills where lightning flickered once without voice, far from the clearing's quiet breath. And when sleep took them all at last, the huts stood firm against the wind rising toward dawn. Walls dark with dew, falling through the hours before light returned. The clearing silent except for roots drinking deep beneath the soft weight of night rain. When the storms finally drifted eastward and the heavy rains stilled into silence, the clearing woke beneath a sky washed pale, the clouds breaking open to reveal a soft morning where mist clung low across the grass, like breath hovering above sleeping earth. The huts crouched along the edge of the clearing, their roofs damp with droplets gathered overnight. Thin smoke curling from small fires still burning within, the smell of wet pine and ash mingling with the sweetness of rain-soaked soil and crushed leaves. The wanderers emerged slowly, their bodies stretching in the cool air, their feet pressing dark shapes into the softened ground as they stepped carefully along narrow trails where puddles gathered sunlight, shimmering like pieces of sky fallen into the earth. The clearing felt altered by the storms, its soil darker, its edges softened, its silence broken only by the call of birds shaking wet wings in the branches, their cries sharp against the lingering hush left behind after days of restless rain. Paths had begun to form naturally between the huts, pressed flat by countless footsteps, winding toward the stream and the new fields. Their dark earth traced by the memory of work already done and the promise of more to come. Children carried clay jars along those paths, their hands still damp with sleep. Their laughter rising thin into the mist as they fetched water, the jars cool and heavy against their skin, the stream's song mingling with their voices beneath the trees. The first shoots in the fields had grown taller during the rains, their leaves bending outward with fresh strength, drops still clinging to their edges. The smell of wet soil rising sharply as the wanderers brushed past them in the morning light. One man scattered ash along the rows, his basket filled with gray dust gathered from nights of fire, the fine powder falling in soft trails, dissolving slowly into the black soil, as though returning to something from which it had once been born. Women followed with water, pouring carefully at the roots. Their movements measured and slow, the soil darkening where the drops sank. The air filled with the sound of pouring, steady and low, like the memory of rivers carried within their hands. The fields swayed gently in the breeze, their young stalks bending with a sound like whispered voices. The clearing alive with motion, though no one hurried. Each step a quiet part of a rhythm too new to name, yet already older than memory. The huts behind them seemed smaller now, half hidden by the rising green, their smoke drifting faint into the air, carrying the scent of roots boiling slowly in clay pots, the smell grounding the wanderers in both hunger and comfort at once. By midday, the sun burned through the last of the mist, light spilling across the clearing in wide bands that shimmered on the wet leaves. The air thick with warmth, the soil steaming faintly where the storms had soaked it deepest. The wanderers worked with sharpened tools, cutting narrow paths between the rows, their blades flashing briefly as they caught the sun, each strike loosening earth until ribbons of dark soil curved gracefully from one side of the clearing to the other. The paths met at the center, where a flat stone lay half buried, its surface smooth from centuries of rain and feet. A silent witness carried through ages, now resting at the heart of fields where the earth itself seemed to hold its breath. At midday they gathered there, laying down their tools, sitting upon the stone or the grass beside it. The heat of the sun heavy upon their shoulders, sweat shining along their arms. Their voices quiet as they broke bread baked on hot stones. The bread cracked softly when torn, its crust darkened by ash. Its scent warm and sharp against the heavy air. Each piece passed slowly between them, their silence filled with the sound of chewing, birds calling, and the wind passing lightly overhead. After eating, they turned the soil beyond the first rows, pushing deeper into the clearing, the ground yielding reluctantly where roots still clung to memory of forest, their work loosening what had once been bound tightly by trees now cut and burned. Birds followed their work, darting low to snatch insects stirred from the soil, their wings flashing white in the sun, their cries sharp but fleeting, rising into the air where hawks circled higher still, shadows gliding silent across the open clearing. Children gathered stones from the turned soil, carrying them in baskets woven from reeds, their small arms trembling beneath the weight. The stones laid carefully along the clearing's edge, where piles grew slowly into shapes resembling the first suggestion of walls. By afternoon, the air grew heavy with heat, the clearing shimmering as though veiled, sweat darkening the wanderers' tunics, dust clinging to their ankles. Their hands roughened by tools, yet still moving with steady rhythm, as though the work had always been theirs. When the sun dipped lower, its light softened into gold, shadows lengthening across the fields. The wind cooling as it slid down from the ridges, carrying with it the smell of pine and damp moss from shaded hollows hidden beyond the clearing. The paths darkened as the evening deepened, the soil pressed smooth by countless feet, each step carrying water, ash, or stones until the fields themselves seemed marked with a map of human presence. Lines drawn into the earth, like memory fixed in place. Smoke rose from many fires now, their threads curling into the violet sky. The air thick with the scent of pine needles burning, the smell sweet and sharp. Drifting between the huts where shadows bent long across walls woven from branches and reeds. They ate together again, roots boiled until their skins peeled away easily. The taste earthy and rich, touched by smoke, the warmth filling them with both strength and calm as the night gathered around. Pressing close against the glow of firelight, songs rose with the night, one voice carrying at first, low and steady. Words rising like a chant older than the fields, the others joining slowly until their tones braided together, the sound turning soft as the children drifted into sleep. The children slept near the fires, their small heads resting on arms folded beneath them. Faces illuminated by flickering flame, the stars above watching silently as though listening. Their cold light scattered across the dark bowl of sky. The moon climbed higher, pale and wide, its light washing silver across the fields. Every stalk gleaming as though painted, the leaves whispering in the night wind, their rustling like soft speech carried across distances too great for the ear to follow. Frost formed lightly by dawn, its delicate teeth biting the tips of grass, the ground glistening faintly where the cold had settled. Though beneath the surface warmth lingered, the soil holding heat like a hidden ember smoldering unseen through the long night. The flat stone in the center grew slick with dew, its smooth surface glowing faint beneath the morning's pale light. The baskets once again gathered around it, their contents waiting to be opened as the wanderers stretched, ready for another day. Each day followed, each step pressing deeper the paths between the fields. The rows lengthening, the piles of stone growing, the huts smoking at night, the fields swaying with wind. The rhythm repeating until it no longer felt new but necessary. The clearing had become something else, no longer only a pause in the wilderness. No longer only a place of passing, but a shape of permanence. A home pressed gently but firmly into the memory of the land itself. And as the winds shifted with the season, carrying new clouds across the sky, the wanderers and their fields remained, bound together by the first paths worn into the soil. Their lives and the earth beginning to move as one. The days lengthened as summer pressed its weight upon the clearing, the air thick with heat that shimmered above the fields. Each breath heavy with the mingled scents of soil, sweat, and wildflowers drifting faintly from the untouched forest edges. The wanderers woke earlier now, before the sun's edge broke across the horizon, their bodies rising from sleep with the cool of dawn still clinging to their skin. Their steps slow yet certain as they moved toward the dark shapes of growing fields. Mist drifted low over the earth, wrapping the shoots in soft veils, each leaf wet with droplets that sparkled faintly when caught by the first slant of light. The fields appearing almost silvered, as though touched by something otherworldly in the hush of morning. The stalks had thickened, their green deepening, their blades whispering against one another in the wind, a constant low murmur like voices conversing in secret, the sound wrapping around the wanderers as they bent close to tend each row. Hands brushed the soil to loosen weeds, fingers cool against the damp earth, the smell of crushed stems rising sharp and green, while others gathered water from the stream. The jars heavy against their shoulders, clay cool against sun-warmed skin. Ash was scattered once more, its fine dust falling like ghostly snow, drifting against the stalks before sinking into the soil, the scent faintly metallic, a memory of fire offered back to earth in quiet hope of stronger growth. The sun climbed higher, pouring gold across the clearing, the heat drawing sweat from every brow, drops sliding down their temples, soaking their tunics. Yet still their movements remained steady, as though the rhythm itself carried them forward. Shadows shortened, the flat stone at the center glowing in the sun, its surface hot to the touch, tools laid across it shining faintly, blades warming until they gleamed as though holding fire within their edges. By midday they paused, retreating into the huts where cool darkness lingered, their breaths slowing as they sat together. Clay bowls passed hand to hand, filled with broth, thin but fragrant with roots and herbs pulled from the soil that morning. Outside, the fields swayed endlessly, their leaves rattling as the wind pressed through. The sound filling the air like a lullaby that never ceased, carrying with it the scent of ripening growth. A sweetness layered upon the earth's darker tones. After rest, they returned. The sun softer now, but still strong. The air thick with buzzing insects, wings flashing bright in the light. Each sound sharp, yet fleeting against the deeper stillness of the field's breathing beneath the weight of the day. They marked the tallest stalks with cords of twisted grass, tying loose knots at their bases, the cords rough against their fingers. The plants bending slightly beneath the touch, chosen as the strongest to hold the seeds for seasons yet to come. Children gathered reeds by the stream, their small hands cutting stalks with stone blades, the reeds stacked high upon their shoulders. Their scent green and sweet, soon to be woven into mats for drying grain when the time of cutting arrived. The paths between the rows darkened with use, smooth as pressed clay, their lines leading from the huts to the fields and back again until they resembled veins through which life itself carried, binding earth and human together into one unbroken body. When evening fell, the sky deepened into shades of rose and violet, shadows lengthening across the fields until each stalk appeared as a black silhouette swaying in rhythm with the cooling wind. The air carrying the distant cry of owls waking in the woods. Fires were lit near the huts, smoke curling soft into the darkening air. Sparks rising like stars scattered upward, the scent of pine resin sharp against the sweetness of roasting roots. The sound of crackling wood blending with quiet songs. The wanderers sang low, voices drawn out slowly, words falling like stones into a still pond, rippling outward until the whole clearing seemed to hum. The fields themselves whispering back with rustles that felt like part of the same song. Children slept early, curled against their mothers' sides, their breaths shallow and even, their faces lit faintly by the flicker of flame, their small hands still marked with dirt from the day's gathering. Their dreams carrying the rhythm of fields swaying endlessly. The moon rose higher, casting silver across the clearing, every stalk gleaming as though touched by frost, though the air remained warm. The leaves shimmering with a quiet brilliance that seemed both real and beyond reach, a vision carried only by night. Dew gathered thick by dawn, beads clinging to every blade of grass, the soil dark beneath the weight of water, the air cool enough to bite at bare skin. Yet already the first birds stirred, their cries piercing the stillness with sharp brightness. The wanderers rose once more, stretching stiff muscles, their eyes drawn immediately to the fields, scanning for signs of growth, of change, of promise. Their hearts bound to each row as though every leaf carried a piece of their own breath. Days passed in rhythm, each sunrise unveiling taller stalks, each sunset closing over leaves that bent lower with the weight of ripening grain. The fields slowly shifting from the deep green of youth to a paler gold touched faintly with shadow. The smell of earth changed too, less sharp, more mellow, as though holding within it a sweetness that had ripened with the season. The air itself carrying a different weight, thicker with pollen, heavier with the promise of harvest near. The wanderers moved differently now, not with urgency, but with patience. Their steps slower, their hands gentler as they touched the stalks, as though listening for something hidden, something silent, something waiting within the heart of each swaying row. Nights grew longer once more, the stars clearer in the cooler air. The fires burning brighter against the chill, songs deeper and slower, their tones resonating through the clearing like an old memory carried on voices that seemed not wholly their own. And as the season turned, the first golden heads bowed low beneath the weight of grain, the stalks bending toward the soil as though in reverence, shadows gathering thick among them while sunlight painted their edges bright, the fields breathing in silence. The wanderers watched from the edges, their hearts caught between wonder and hunger, between reverence and need. the sight of earth offering itself back to them, both strange and familiar, as though it had always been waiting beneath the soil. In the stillness of those evenings, when the last birds fell silent and the stars trembled above, the clearing felt less like a place made by human hands and more like a gift given by the earth itself, fragile yet enduring, quiet yet eternal. The season ripened with a fullness that seemed almost too heavy for the earth to bear, the fields stretching wide beneath the sky, their colors shifting each day from deep green to pale yellow, until they glowed softly in the warmth of afternoon light. Each morning began with the hush of mist spread low over the ground, curling around the stalks like smoke from an unseen fire. The air damp and cool upon the wanderer's skin, their breaths mingling with the drifting fog as they walked the paths. The stalks no longer stood straight in youthful defiance, but bent gently under the weight of ripened heads. Their grain swelling with quiet abundance, their husks rough to the touch, their scent sweet yet earthy, heavy as though drawn directly from the bones of the soil. Hands brushed along the rows, fingertips grazing the bowed stalks, listening for the sound of readiness in the whisper of leaves, their rustling low and patient. A language carried only to those who had walked beside them since the first seed touched earth. Children no longer ran recklessly between the rows, but moved softly now, instructed to tread carefully, their small hands pressed together to catch stray grains that loosened and fell. Their laughter quieter, respectful of the solemn hush that surrounded the nearing harvest. Women carried woven baskets lined with reeds, their shoulders bent beneath the steady rhythm of labor, their steps careful on the worn paths, their eyes often raised to the horizon where the sky deepened into shades of copper as the sun sank low. Men worked to sharpen stone blades against rock, sparks faint in the dim of dusk, the edges honed to smooth sharpness. Their motions repeated endlessly with patience, each sound of scraping carrying across the clearing like the pulse of time itself. At the heart of the village, a flat stone served as their table of preparation, its surface worn smooth by years of tools laid upon it, the scent of stone and metal blending with the fragrance of stalks drifting in from the fields. The air was different now, filled with the hum of bees drawn by the sweetness of ripening grain, their wings catching the sun like fragments of glass, their presence steady, their labor as constant as the quiet breathing of the land itself. Evenings carried a solemn beauty, the sky painted with long streaks of crimson and violet, the fields bathed in golden haze, the hush of twilight settling softly, the stalks bending together in shadow as though bowing in silent gratitude for the day's light. Fires were lit near the huts, their glow reaching outward, touching the edges of the fields with faint flickers, the smoke rising in thin curls into the night sky where stars gathered slowly, shimmering like seeds scattered across an endless field above. Songs were sung in lower tones, voices moving like rivers, steady and unbroken, carrying memories of wandering, of forests once unbroken, of rivers wide and cold, now reshaped into verses that wove themselves into the new rhythm of settled earth. Children leaned against their elders, listening with heavy eyelids, their minds filling with stories that seemed older than memory itself, their small hands grasping grains as tokens, as if to hold tightly to the proof of life that had emerged from the soil. By night the fields gleamed pale beneath the moon, the stalks silvered, their shadows long upon the ground. The air cool with dew gathering on leaves, the silence pierced only by the faint cries of night birds hidden in the forest edges. The wanderers slept lightly, stirred often by the weight of anticipation, their dreams filled with images of stalks bending, of seeds spilling into their hands, of baskets overflowing with gold. Dreams that smelled of earth and tasted faintly of sweetness. With dawn they rose again, their bodies weary yet bound to the rhythm of the fields, their bare feet pressing cool paths, their eyes searching for subtle changes in the colors of the stalks, noting each new shade as though it were a message. They touched the soil with their palms, feeling its warmth or coolness, measuring its readiness. Their fingers stained with dust and pollen, their senses sharpened by closeness to the earth. Their knowledge unspoken, yet carried deep within the quiet pulse of their lives. Children watched birds swoop low across the fields, their wings dark against the bright sky, their cries sharp and fleeting, their hunger evident. Yet the wanderers drove them away gently, knowing both bird and grain belonged to the same turning of seasons. The air grew drier, each breeze carrying a faint rustle like paper, each step stirring dust from the ground, the scent of ripened grain mingling with the smell of sun-warmed earth, a fragrance heavy with finality, as though the land itself whispered of endings. Insects buzzed lazily, slower in the weight of heat, their wings dragging through the thick air, their bodies glinting briefly before vanishing into the tangle of stalks. Their presence constant yet subdued, another layer to the tapestry of ripening days. The wanderers moved with patience, neither rushing nor delaying, as though they too bent beneath the weight of ripeness. Their bodies attuned to the slow turning of time, their hearts listening for the moment when the fields would call to be gathered. Evening fires grew brighter as the nights lengthened, their warmth holding back the creeping chill that edged into the clearing, their flames rising like prayers, the smoke carrying upward the unspoken hopes of those who waited with quiet reverence. Songs slowed further, drawn out like the breath of the earth itself, the words less important than the tones, each voice blending with another until the sound became something deeper, something that seemed to bind sky and soil and human together. The children fell silent, watching embers rise like stars, their eyes wide, their bodies curled close, their thoughts shaped by the rhythm of voices and the steady crackle of wood, their dreams seated with the quiet weight of the seasons turning. By the final weeks, the fields had shifted into a sea of pale gold, the stalks bowing lower, their grain heavy, their shadows deeper, the light of morning softer against their edges, the whole clearing transformed into something luminous, fragile, and waiting. The wanderers gathered at the edge, watching silently, their breaths held as though in reverence, their eyes filled with both gratitude and awe. For they knew that within those bowed heads lay the promise of tomorrow, the breath of seasons yet unseen. The air itself seemed to pause, holding its breath, the fields swaying in the last winds of summer, the sky vast and endless above, the earth beneath alive with quiet energy, a moment suspended between ripeness and harvest, between fullness and release. And as night once more wrapped the clearing, the fields gleamed pale beneath the stars, each stalk a quiet flame in the darkness, each shadow a reminder of time's steady passage, the land whispering its eternal song of giving and receiving. In that stillness the wanderers rested, knowing the days of harvest drew near, knowing the rhythm of their lives would soon change again, yet content to sit beneath the stars, listening to the goldfields breathe softly beneath the endless sky. The fields stood heavy with ripened grain, the stalks bending low beneath the weight of full kernels, their golden hues shimmering in the light of early autumn, while breezes whispered through them with the soft rustle of 1,000 murmuring voices. The wanderers moved among the swaying rows, their hands brushing the stalks gently, fingers tracing the texture of dry husks that crackled faintly at their touch, their palms filling with warmth as they gathered what the soil had offered. Baskets were carried into the fields, woven reeds creaking beneath the pressure of grain, the air rich with the earthy scent of chaff, the sweetness of seed husks mingling with the faint dust rising in clouds that shimmered golden beneath the sun. The harvest became rhythm, a slow and measured dance of bending, cutting, lifting, and placing, their bodies moving with the calm certainty of ritual, their voices soft as they murmured songs that rose and fell with the cadence of their work. Children followed close behind, chasing the falling stalks, their laughter high and bright, though muffled by the thick air, their small hands clutching kernels like treasures, lifting them to their mouths with wonder, their cheeks full as they tasted the earth's gift. Elders watched from the shade of huts, their eyes glistening in firelight even during the day, their lips moving in quiet remembrance of years when the land gave little, and the people leaned upon the forest, hungering for what never came easily. When the baskets filled, the wanderers poured them onto mats spread wide across the ground, the kernels sliding into heaps, their sound like steady rainfall on stone, each pile glowing like spilled sunlight, a treasure gleaming upon the earth itself. The air thickened with fragrance, the grain warm from the sun, releasing sweetness as it shifted, the dust clinging to skin, rough yet comforting. The taste lingering in the breath of those who worked, filling their mouths with faint flavor, even before eating. The harvest stretched through the day, shadows growing long, the stalks cut down in steady swaths. The clearing bright with new emptiness, the sky above pale and open. Birds circling as if watching the people claim what once belonged only to the wind. As the final baskets filled, the wanderers gathered together, their arms sore, their backs bent, yet their faces softened with quiet pride, their gazes resting upon the golden heaps, the vision of abundance sinking into them like warmth after a long chill. They decided that night would not pass in silence, for this moment demanded more than labor. It asked for voices, for fire, for music, for the joining of hands, and so the harvest became not just work, but a festival of thanks. As dusk deepened, fires were kindled, sparks leaping high into the violet sky, their light casting the fields in shades of bronze and shadow, their smoke rising to mingle with the fading fragrance of cut stalks and cooling soil. The wanderers gathered near, placing food upon flat stones, roasting grains until they cracked with sound, their fragrance toasty and sweet, the taste nutty upon their tongues, the first mouthfuls shared with wide eyes and soft murmurs of reverence. They painted their faces with ash and ochre, simple lines drawn across cheeks and brows, the patterns carrying meanings older than fields. Whispers of the forest days, symbols for wind, water, fire, and sky, each stroke a memory turned into blessing. Children carried small torches, waving them through the dark, their flames trailing sparks like brief stars falling into the grass, their laughter mingling with the crackling wood, the night alive with light and motion, their joy a song all its own. The drums emerged from within the huts, hollow logs stretched with hide, beaten slowly at first. Their voices low, resonant and patient, like the pulse of the earth itself, each beat rolling across the clearing, stirring the air like a heartbeat. Voices joined, rising in unison, some high and wavering, some deep and steady, their tones weaving together in simple chants. Words carrying thanks to the soil, the seeds, the sky, and to the unseen spirits who lingered at the edge of firelight. The rhythm grew, the sound circling through the clearing, echoing against the trees. The forest listening as though leaning closer, its shadows swaying in time with the flames, its silence answering the voices with a hush of leaves. Men and women danced upon the trampled earth, their steps slow, deliberate, echoing the pattern of planting and cutting, their movements shaped by memory of the seasons, their bodies swaying like stalks in the wind, their feet stamping the soil with gratitude. Children joined, mimicking the steps, their arms lifted, their bodies spinning until they fell laughing into the grass, the firelight painting them in copper and gold, their joy echoing into the night. A promise that the fields had not only fed but sustained spirit. The elders sat in circles, their voices carrying stories older than seeds, tales of ancestors who walked beneath endless forests, their words painting images of shadowed groves, rushing rivers, and hunts beneath the moon, their tones both wistful and proud. The younger ones listened, their eyes wide, their ears filled with the low drone of drums, the crackling of fires, and the ancient voices telling them that though the world had changed, the thread of memory bound them still to what had been. The air thickened with warmth, with smoke, with fragrance. The harvest festival becoming a living thing, a weaving of sound and light. A pause within time itself, as though the turning of the world slowed to honor what the people had achieved. The moon rose pale, high above the clearing, casting silver upon the fields now stripped bare, its light mingling with the orange glow of fires, creating shadows that danced like figures of smoke, moving with the people, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. Songs lingered into the night, voices rising softer as hours passed, the drums slowing, their rhythms settling into a steady heartbeat. Fires burning lower, the clearing dimming, until only the quiet hum of embers marked the festival's waning. The wanderers lay down upon mats, their bodies weary yet filled with calm, their ears still echoing with the memory of drums, their eyes heavy beneath the glow of fire, their dreams drifting with images of golden fields and full baskets. The jars of grain, though not yet filled, stood waiting, their presence near, their promise strong, their clay bodies cool in the night air, their shadows cast long across the ground, so watching over the people with silent, steady eyes. The fields outside stretched empty and dark, the soil bare but alive, resting beneath the stars, holding within it the memory of seeds that had risen, the stalks that had fallen, and the gift now stored in heaps beside the fires. And within that silence, beneath the fading leaves, the wanderers knew they had crossed another threshold. For the first time joining their labor with song, their gathering with celebration, their survival with the rhythm of joy and memory entwined. The harvest festival became more than a feast, more than fire or music. It became a moment pressed into the heart of the people, a memory they would carry into every season that followed, a story told with every jar filled, every seed sown. And so beneath the pale moon and the cooling air, the wanderers rested, surrounded by warmth, abundance, and song, while the wilderness beyond the fields whispered softly, watching as the first farmers gave thanks for the gifts of the earth. The harvest was complete, yet the fields still spoke softly beneath the autumn sky, their stubble bending faintly in the wind, carrying the lingering scent of cut stalks and dry soil. A memory pressed into earth and air alike. The wanderers moved through the clearing slowly, their hands full of baskets, their fingers tracing the curves of each ear of grain, the husks rough beneath their touch, each kernel shining faintly like gold caught from a hidden sun. Clay jars stood ready, cool against the warmth of their palms, hollow mouths awaiting the gift of harvest, each one carefully lifted, filled, and set aside. Their surfaces rough, dotted with fingerprints that marked both care and toil. The grain slid into the jars in gentle cascades, a soft, rustling sound echoing faintly across the clearing, like quiet rainfall. Each kernel settling into place with a whisper that seemed to promise safety, abundance, and the slow passage of seasons yet to come. The air was heavy with the fragrance of husks and earth, mixed with resin from the lids that sealed the jars, their scent sharp and sweet. A perfume of survival, of memory, of gratitude pressed into the clay and carried by the hands of those who had worked the fields. Children moved beside the adults, their small hands clutching stray kernels, pressing them to their lips, tasting the sweetness of the season, their fingers dusted with pale gold, their laughter soft and tentative in the hushed rhythm of storing what had been gathered. The elders leaned close to the jars, their hands running along the cool clay, their voices low as they spoke of years when the earth gave little, when the forests were endless and food scarce, their words a bridge between memory and the present abundance. The first frost whispered along the edges of the clearing, turning dew to fine silver, crunching faintly beneath the wanderers' feet. The air crisp against their cheeks, carrying the sharp scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke drifting from distant fires. Fires blazed higher near the huts, their warmth reaching outward to touch the edges of the fields, casting long, flickering shadows across the jars. The soil, and the few remaining stalks that had not yet been gathered, shadows that danced in quiet harmony with the night. The wanderers paused often, their breaths visible in the cooling air. Their hands resting on the jars, their eyes lifted toward the pale moon above, its light glinting off smooth clay and golden grain. Soft and distant, like the memory of another world. Evening carried a solemn beauty, the sky deepening into shades of violet and indigo. Stars trembling faintly, each one distant and cold yet steady, a reminder that the rhythm of seasons moved quietly, carrying both light and dark through the turning year. The work was methodical, almost meditative, as baskets were emptied, jars filled, lids pressed firmly into place. The sound of hands moving over clay and grain forming a steady cadence. A rhythm the wanderers carried deep within themselves long after the day had ended. The children listened and learned, watching how to handle each jar with care, how to move without spilling, how to respect the grain that had emerged from the soil, the forest, and the wind. Each lesson held in quiet memory to be carried into future seasons. The elders spoke of winter's approach, of the need for vigilance, of the cold that would press against the huts, and of how the stored grain would be their shield, their promise, their sustenance, binding them together in a covenant of patience and foresight. Smoke drifted from hearths, mingling with the smell of dry earth and ripened grain, curling upward and fading into the darkening sky, carrying the quiet offerings of gratitude to the unseen spirits of the land. A bridge between the human and the eternal. The wanderers moved slowly now, their bodies careful in the frost, their hands roughened by months of labor, their breaths forming clouds in the air. Each exhale a rhythm joined to the pulse of the clearing, the fields, the forest, and the sky. Even the remaining birds had quieted, their call soft and rare, the forest drawing inward. Bracing against the coming cold, the clearing now filled with the hushed sigh of earth resting after labor, yet alive with memory and promise stored in clay and grain. The huts became small islands of warmth. Children huddled close to their parents, listening to the low hum of voices and the crackle of fires. The air perfumed with smoke, husks, and resin. The grain jars standing sentinel in the quiet corners, silent but alive with promise. The wanderers took stock, counting each jar, running hands along surfaces, listening for the subtle shifts of settling grain, a reassurance that the season's labor had been preserved, that winter would find them fed, and that life would continue in rhythm with earth and sky. The nights grew longer, frost deepening, the soil hard beneath their feet, the air carrying the scent of leaves turned and decayed, of pine and of smoke drifting from distant fires. The world slowing into the quiet rhythm of waiting, holding its breath until spring. Songs were quieter now, slow and deliberate, the voices of elders carrying stories of forests before fields, of rivers that ran wild and clear, of ancestors who had walked beneath endless canopies. Their lessons pressed gently into the minds of the young. Children slept early, curled beneath cloaks, their small hands resting on stray grains, their dreams filled with fields and firelight. With songs and stories, their hearts absorbing the quiet weight of abundance, the understanding of seasons, of giving and receiving, of patient waiting. The wanderers watched the stars tracing their paths above the fields, reflecting on months of growth, the careful rhythm of planting, tending, and harvesting. The jars of grain standing as testimony to their labor, patience, and respect for the cycles of earth and sky. By dawn, frost coated the soil, glittering pale across the empty fields, each stalk reduced to a memory pressed into earth. The clearing hushed beneath a silver light, the jars resting like guardians, holding within them the promise of life through the long, cold months. And in that stillness, the wanderers understood the language of the season, the quiet dialogue between soil, seed, and sky, a rhythm older than memory, carrying within it both a burden of labor and the grace of survival, a lesson as patient as the turning of time itself. The first frost had settled across the clearing, silvering the empty fields where stalks once swayed like golden tides, the air crisp and still, carrying the faint fragrance of dry husks, cold earth, and lingering warmth from hearths within the huts. The wanderers move slowly, their steps deliberate over hard soil, hands brushing the empty rows with care, remembering each bend of stalk, each subtle whisper of wind, each soft tremble of grain that had once filled their palms with golden abundance. Clay jars lined the hut walls, cool and silent, yet filled with the quiet pulse of life, each kernel a memory pressed into earth, a promise kept, a bridge between the work of their hands and the unseen rhythm of the seasons yet to come. Children gathered near, small fingers tracing the smooth curves of clay, listening to the faint shifting of grain inside, their faces alight with curiosity and wonder, eyes reflecting firelight. Their dreams mingled with stories of forests, fields, and the steady generosity of the soil. The elders leaned close, their hands rough and warm upon the children's shoulders, their voices soft, telling again the story of wandering, planting, tending, and harvesting, of how the forest had slowly given way to fields, and how patience and care had drawn sustenance from the earth. Outside, the forest held its breath, shadows long beneath a pale sky, leaves fallen and crisp, the scent of pine and decaying leaf drifting through the clearing. As if nature itself paused to witness the transformation, the quiet becoming of lands reshaped by careful hands. Smoke curled from hearths, rising slowly into the still air, carrying warmth and scent across the frost-hardened soil. The orange glow spilling onto jars, mats, and tools, illuminating the simple geometry of a world now measured by labor, patience, and the gift of seed. The air was filled with reflection, a hush carried not by absence but by understanding, a knowledge pressed into bones and memory that the land and those who tended it were bound together, each depending upon the other in the rhythm older than time itself. Children slept in the corner of huts, dreaming of golden fields and silvered frost, of the swaying stalks under open skies, of hands cupped to hold the gift of grain, of songs and laughter carried by wind across both forest and clearing, their hearts learning the quiet language of seasons. The wanderers traced the edges of the field, their feet pressing familiar soil, their eyes lifted toward distant trees, still standing at the edges of memory, their trunks dark against the frost, their branches whispering faintly, reminding the people of what had been before seeds replaced forests. Every jar, every basket, every mat of stored grain became a testament, a quiet archive of months of work and the patient unfolding of time, a record of care that would feed bodies and hearts alike, carrying knowledge from one season to the next, from one generation to another. Fires burned low, the warmth holding back the cold that seeped from the clearing, while the wanderers gathered close, shared simple meals, the taste of roasted grains sweet upon their tongues. Each bite a reminder of the harvest, of patience rewarded, of life sustained. Voices rose softly in evening song, drawn from memory and instinct, weaving sound into the rhythm of jars, mats, and earth, carrying gratitude outward into the darkening clearing, across the frost-silvered soil, and into the edges of forests that once ruled the land. The moon rose pale and distant, casting silver upon jars, tools, and the few remaining stalks, its light touching each object with quiet reverence, drawing long shadows that flickered softly in the glow of embers, transforming the familiar into something magical and eternal. The children stirred in sleep, small hands clutching stray kernels, their dreams carrying images of planting and reaping, of wind over fields, of firelight dancing on husks, of elders' voices, and of the silent pulse of earth beneath their feet, all merging into a single, gentle memory. The wanderers walked again through the clearing, hands brushing soil, listening to the faint sigh of empty rows, feeling the pulse of land that had given so generously, understanding now that each seed sown, each stalk bent, each jar filled, was part of a dialogue with time itself. The air outside held the subtle scent of winter, sharp yet calm. Frost glinting along stubble and fallen leaves, the forest edge dark and still, and the fields bare but alive in memory. Each footprint pressed into frozen soil, carrying the story of labor and quiet care. The elders spoke again, their voices soft, drawing the younger ones near, telling stories that bridged forests and fields, memory and harvest, life before seeds and life after. Each word pressed into hearts like kernels pressed into earth, carrying lessons of patience, gratitude, and careful watching. The fires faded slowly, embers glowing low, the night deepening. The air still, carrying the faint sweet scent of stored grain and cold soil. The jars standing like silent sentinels, their presence a reminder of the rhythm of giving and receiving, of seasons held in balance. The wanderers lay upon mats, bodies weary yet hearts full, listening to the hush of night, to the soft stirrings of children in sleep, to the faint whisper of wind across the frost-silvered clearing, to the pulse of a world reshaped by seed and memory alike. Above them, stars trembled faintly in a vast, dark sky, each one distant yet steady, a reminder that time moved slowly and steadily, carrying the story of the first farmers, their patience, their care, and the quiet transformation of lands once wild, now cultivated with reverence. In the hush of winter's approach, the wanderers understood the cycle fully. The dialogue between earth and seed, memory and labor, harvest and cold, knowing that though the forest had receded and the wilderness changed, life endured, shaped by patient hands and quiet hearts. And as sleep claimed them, dreams carried golden fields, silver frost, jars brimming with grain, and the soft echo of distant forests, leaving the wanderers resting beneath the sky, cradled in the gentle rhythm of seasons, the quiet miracle of seeds, and the enduring song of the earth itself.